Can everyone see the slides now? Thanks for the introduction, Tom. So we're just going to spend a few minutes talking about the COSMIC-19 study, which is a study ongoing within Manchester, sponsored by Innovate UK and the Christie Charitable Foundation. So just to give you a bit of a background about the collaboration, there was something that was set up by Innovate UK in 2018 called the Innovate Manchester Advanced Therapy Centre Hub. This is part of a broader three national centres that were set up by Innovate UK, really to focus on supporting the development, adoption and deployment of cell and gene therapies, advanced medicinal therapeutic products into the NHS. It's an academic industrial collaboration that's been going on for about 3 years. And within Manchester, these are the industrial and academic and clinical partners that are involved in Manchester. And it was really the vision for IMatch is to make the running of clinical trials with cell and gene therapies as normal as running typical cell and gene therapy as typical studies. Obviously, cell and gene therapy studies create a number of challenges, and it's really about through partnership, learning best practice and so on, that we're trying to actually improve the adoption and the delivery of cell and gene therapy trials in the NHS. So Tony, shall I hand over to you now to talk a little bit about the AI?
Sure, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so to set the stage, let's think about what AI is, and then move on to think about how we incorporated that in the COSMIC-19 trial. So we've got a number of drivers out there, and those drivers are all saying we need to do something. We need to do something quickly. And I think in the context of COVID, all COVID has done is just exacerbate all of these drivers and made them more apparent and more of a problem. I'm not going to go through all of them, but everybody knows Eroom's law, which is Moore's law spelled backwards. And that is, that the cost of developing a drug, bringing it to market, increases 2 times every 9 years. One of the other interesting things to think about is we talk a lot about digital how we can get EHR more established in the hospitals. But this is a recent figure from the US that says physicians are now spending 2 times the amount of time over clinical on entering data into EHR systems. So it has its problems. The amount of data which we're generating in healthcare is doubling every 73 days. And then everybody knows, chronic diseases, the number of people over 65. One interesting statistic which has increased from 7x to 10x is the growth of telehealth. And that is, I think, as a direct result of COVID. So we think about digital transformation, we think about wearables. Both of those are going to be driving more and more data. And we know that humans really can't interpret vast amounts of data as well as we can with computers, and more specifically with AI. So what does AI mean? What is AI? So I'd like to propose just a very simple definition, and AI is prediction. So we can predict things a lot better using AI. If we're making decisions, whether those decisions are clinical decisions, business decisions, logistics decisions, they are formed of 2 components. Those 2 components are prediction and judgment. Humans are very, very good at judgment. Computers, AI are much better at prediction. So by phasing those 2 together, we can get better outcomes. So I think that's a fundamental thing. The other fundamental thing is that AI is not something you do to data. I can't tell you the number of discussions I've had where people have said, we've got this data, can you look at it with AI? AI is not this activity that you do to data. It has to be inherent in the study design, in the question you're trying to answer right from the beginning. And that, I think, is a very key learning which transcends most industries and also clinical trials, healthcare. It is this thing that has to be woven into the fabric of everything we're doing. So if we look in the middle at the discovery, development, and implementation, which is basically the AI roadmap, one of the key things to realize is that AI is a little bit different than statistics. In other words, statistics is deterministic and AI is probabilistic. So that first discovery phase is very much akin to what we think about in the pharmaceutical arena. It's discovery. We wouldn't put the constraints of a phase 3 clinical trial in discovery. So we shouldn't put the constraints of the way we handle data into the discovery phase of AI. So it is a discrete initial process that we go through, and it's highly iterative, which is one of the other things I think a lot of people don't realize is the iterative nature of how we get the data in, how we look at it, how we do data munging, how we build models, and then ultimately how we implement it. It's not the old waterfall type of strategy moving forward. It's the agile, it's iterative, it's circular, there's a lot of feedback. So the models we're trying to create are going to do different things. Those models are going to be decision support, they're going to be software as a medical device, they're going to be digital diagnostics or digital therapeutics. So that's the outcome. The other key thing is that AI is very data-driven. So we have to get the data to be able to get the results. And I think that is another paradigm shift in a lot of thought processes around clinical trials, where we have the data and then we manage the data. Here we have to acquire the data, iterative look and see how that data is being used, feed that back in, and then get more data, different types of data, different contexts, and put that into the model. So really what we think about having is an AI process. So that AI process is not something which is just doing AI. It's in whole looking at the entire process. So first of all, what question are we trying to answer? What's the problem? How does that relate to the data we're trying to obtain? And that is iterative backwards and forwards. Then we do data munging. We clean the data. Do we have the right tools? And then move on to modeling. Have we model that data? Do we then go back and get more data of a different kind? And then move on to evaluation of that data. So this cyclic process is very important. And this is something we've adopted, and this is based on CRISP DM, which is the cross-industry standard process for data mining. We've iterated that and we've made it more AI-ish, and we can implement that in a lot of things that we're talking about. Currently, we've got over 6 studies, and this is just one of them. And it's important to realize that you have to have a process. You can't just go in here and figure out what to do on the fly ad hoc. And then we've got a balance between some of the attributes. You know, are we looking at a class 2, class 1 medical device, or are we looking at a consumer device? We're working currently with the regulators, and we're thinking about now, is the information from a longitudinal time series data gathering perspective more important than an episodic accurate measurement? We've talked a little bit about the waterfall to agile, and clearly AI is very agile. We have to iterate. The privacy concerns are also interesting. We obviously have GDPR, privacy concerns, but I've been to recently a couple of foundations and charities, and I've been asked by patients, not why are you using my data, but why are you not using my data? If the data can give a better outcome, can help me, yes, go ahead and use it. So I think that maybe has changed over the last 12 months. I think people are now more willing to provide their data if we can give them benefits from that data and improve their outcomes. So let's have a look about how this sort of iterated into the Cosmic 19. Next slide, Steve. So we're talking about using time series deep learning. So that's pretty much what the AI is about. We're taking temporal features, i.e. time-based, we're taking spatial features, and we're taking metadata features. So all of those are taken from recording vital signs, recording diagnostics, EHR systems, clinically reported outcomes. All of that is aggregated together. And we apply that data capture over the entire patient journey. So the patient obviously begins with admission to a hospital, then may get put into a ward. From the ward, they may move to an ICU. From an ICU, they may iterate back to a ward, and so on and so forth. So if we think in terms of the context of that patient journey, we'll be collecting data throughout that process. And that data is going to be acquired at different frequencies, which brings a consistent challenge for any deep learning AI system is how do we handle data coming in continuously, minute, sub-minute, episodically, once a week, once a month, routine, once every 2 hours, informative, which means a clinician makes a decision, I need this test now, whereas another clinician may decide he doesn't need the test. So that informative sampling throws a spanner into some of the works when we talk about deep learning, and also the metadata. Metadata is totally static. So how do we integrate all of that data together? So we've been developing a database, which is actually 6 separate databases. We're using a file server in there and other technologies to be able to process that data. We're using ensemble approaches, which is different algorithms, different models put together. And out of that, we generate AI. And from that AI comes the model. And we iterate that backwards and forwards. We take that model back into the database. We look at the data we've got. We go around another iterative process. So leaving you with a patient journey, we're taking information at different frequencies. We're putting that into an algorithm to generate a model, validating that model by going back to the data and reiterating again. So, Anthony, over to you. Let's talk about how we actually implemented it in Cosmic.
Thanks, Tony. That's great. Yes, so Tony's given us a detail about the AI part of the Cosmic 19 trial, and I wanted to really just fill you in on some of the background about the study itself and what we were hoping to achieve. Cosmic 19 stands for Continuous Signs Monitoring in COVID-19. We had an opportunity at the middle of last year to see if we could monitor patients in a ward-based environment who had COVID-19 using a raft of Bluetooth wearable sensors manufactured by a company called Isansis. And you can see some pictures of the sort of wearable sensors that we were hoping to use there that give us a sort of suite of vital signs and Bluetooth into a tablet that sits at the end of a patient's bed. This is a CE marked system, and it's been sort of validated for use in sort of ward environments. But what we wanted to do was to sort of put it through its paces in a tough environment, really. A hospital ward in the middle of a pandemic, when there was issues concerning infection control, wards being much busier than they were normally. And we wanted to see if this sort of system could actually allow us to monitor patients accurately. Because as Tony sort of briefly alluded to, the quality of the AI algorithm really depends on the quality of the data you can get. So that the more of it that you can get through sort of continuous monitoring in a ward environment helps. But also we need to know that it was actually able to do its job and that these devices function practically. So we wanted to sort of query that and then to go on to use this data in conjunction to the other things that Tony's described to predict deterioration and predict recovery in patients that were suffering from COVID-19. And going along with that, really, there's a piece of practical learning that we were hoping to do as well. Practical learning about, you know, how these devices function in a sort of normal workflow on a hospital ward. Because ultimately, if we're going to put these into practice in a bigger scale, nurses and doctors working in that ward environment need to feel comfortable with this technology. They need to understand what to do if the devices drop off. We need to understand how often that happens. So all this practical learning and ways about automating how we extract the data from this system was part of what we were hoping to achieve with COSMIC-19. Now, we were very fortunate that the idea to enrolment for the trial was 4 months, and that's a really fast turnaround, and it's testament to our project partners and testament really to the fact that we'd been sort of pump priming and planning a trial like this in advance of COVID-19. So we had an idea to use this technology as part of IMATCH in the Advanced Cell Therapy group to look at patients having treatment for hematological malignancy. And so when COVID arrived, we were fortunate that our relationship with our funders, Innovate UK, was such that we could say, well, actually, we've got an idea of how we can pivot this and use this technology for good during COVID. And this is how the trial came about. So the pump priming and the preparation that we'd done allowed us to be quite agile in an NHS environment. And so far, we've recruited, you know, I think actually nearly 3/4 now of the patients that we've planned. We've managed to integrate our system with the hospital IT, which is no mean feat. And we've also managed to automate some of the metadata and the routine healthcare data collection to go along with the trial and to feed into the databases that Tony was describing to you. So Steve, we'll move on to the next slide if we can, please, because what I really wanted to do was just to highlight for the audience some of the things that I think that the learnings that we've got from COSMIC-19 and the things that I think are key for AI and wearable device trials that are being delivered in a sort of hospital NHS setting. So I think the first one is this whole concept of a collaboration in waiting. The fact that we'd pump primed and that we'd got ready to do this and that we had a good relationship with our funder and a good relationship between the NHS partners and the sort of SMEs that were involved in our project was really, really important. And so I would say that for the clinicians in the audience, that actually, although at the beginning, perhaps when we first had our meetings between the different partners, we didn't understand exactly what trial we were going to do or where we were going to go with this. Those meetings had value because they built that relationship, and it meant that we were able to move swiftly when we needed to do. I think for people that are trying to reach into the NHS and to do trials using data and using new technology in a healthcare setting, finding the right clinician is really important. And so, I mean, I think we were lucky in COSMIC-19 that we had myself and other clinicians involved who I would describe as clinical informaticists. Clinicians who have got a real interest in how we can use electronically collected healthcare data to the benefit of patients. Because I think that means that you're more likely to be able to navigate the hospital system and the structures within the hospital to get access to the things you need to. And for us, that was apparent in how easy it was to gain hospital IT support. Having a personal relationship with the guy who sort of is our hospital IT server manager meant that it was easy to phone up and get the server upgrades that we needed to run this system through our sort of hospital informatics network. Also, the observational design of COSMIC-19 was important. I think had we tried to replace routine care with a new technology from the outset, it would have been very difficult to overcome some of the governance hurdles that are there and are appropriate in a hospital setting. So we very much use this technology in an observational setting. We didn't alter routine care at this stage, because what we saw was that the first thing to do was to get the technology into the hospital and get it being used. And by saying that we weren't going to have an impact on routine care and alter clinical care pathways, it was much easier to do that. We had a very resourceful team of research nurses, but I would highlight this as being an area where potentially some extra training needs to be invested too. So many of our research nurse team are very familiar with delivering a sort of a clinical interventional trial with drugs and these kind of things. But the idea of using technology and some of the sort of the challenges that they had to do to set that technology up on a ward to make sure that it was working properly and connected appropriately were quite new to them. And I would say that we benefited having from a couple that were really resourceful, but that's really a training need, both for any future trials that need to be done. And we need to think about how our research nurses are trained in that regard, and also then how they champion that training to the rest of the sort of community of nurses that are working on the wards. And lastly, one of the things that COVID really led to was virtual trial meetings. So the majority of our trials meetings were conducted virtually using MS Teams and Zoom. And that meant that things were much more efficient in terms of setting up and managing some of the sort of the bureaucracy and the sort of logistics of organising the trial. So I think that's most of the things that I wanted to add about it, but I'd stop there and hand over to any questions.